Okay, I know some people are worried that maybe their ideas will get knocked off in China, that if you find a supplier, that supplier could become your competitor. Sometimes these factories are huge. They have distribution partners around the world. You've got this great idea. How do you avoid having your ideas compromised? In my experience, you come at it from 4 angles. Obviously, first, register your intellectual property. If you haven't registered your brands, anything that is patentable, your utility patents, what have you, in China, it's first to register rather than first to market. That means if you show me this cool idea that you have at the trade show, but you haven't registered your logo, I can go to Beijing now, pay a couple $100 and register it, and now I own it in China according to the Chinese government. So be very careful about who you share your ideas with. First, the good news is that it's very affordable and easy to register your brands and patents in China. So, and nowadays there's plenty of English-speaking lawyers. I can introduce you to the ones that I work with, and it's even less expensive than doing it back home. So register your IP not only at the government, but also with the ports. The port authorities, for example, if you're dealing in a product that has a Disney licensee, technically the port authority should be checking, is it a licensed exporter before the goods go out. And even if you don't have the most, even if you're not Disney, you can still get your product as a registered brand. And believe it or not, because the Chinese know that they've had a black eye for IP infringements for so long, they're going out of their way to enforce these issues. So if you do, let them do their job, meaning show them that your designs, or as long as it can be legally protected, if it belongs to you, let the ports work for you in China. And don't forget to tell your supplier why, not only that this brand belongs to you, but why it's important that they don't do business with other companies or other brands. A lot of times we register the product, maybe we talk to the ports, but register the logo, but we forget to explain to our supplier why it's so important that they don't do business with these 5 other competitors. So I'll talk a little bit later how to make that stick, but don't forget to at least tell your suppliers what's important to you about respect of your intellectual property. Now, limit your exposure both during production and especially pre-production. I have a good friend who is a Chinese factory boss, and I went to his factory one time, and his R&D department said, R&D, nice little office. I go inside, there's no employees, no computers, it's just a room with some dust on the floor. But he always had really great ideas. He always had the coolest products. And I asked him, hey, over a couple beers one time, how do you come up with all these great products and there's no one in your R&D department? He's like, trade shows? I'm like, what do you mean? Well, he told me that often visitors to the trade shows are under a lot of pressure to find a factory. So they come with all of their ideas, their blueprints, the counter samples, and they give it to 15 factories, and then maybe they do business with one of those factories. What about the other 14 factories? Now they have the idea and they have the specifications. Maybe they really like your idea. So my friend in this factory was actually partially Korean owned, and they did high-end handbags. Their trade show booth was not necessarily to make new customers, but it was to see what new trends are out there and then copy those and get it to market before the person that was coming to the trade show gets it to market. So during your, how can you avoid that? Well, you can ask, during the quotation process, you can use a similar product. For example, maybe this is not the watch I want to have made, but it's pretty similar, and my watch has a special band. Okay, well, I'll use a generic band for now, get the quotes, narrow it down to 2 or 3 factories, do my due diligence, make sure these guys have a good reputation for respecting intellectual property, then I let them see the secret sauce. So I kind of take it at steps. Now, once you get to the production phase, you also need to be careful, especially if you're dealing with like a sub-supplier or traders. Who has access to your technology? If you're a new brand, you're working with a company, but they won't let you visit the production site, that's usually a red flag. If they're a trading company or broker, they don't own the factory. Well, who is that factory doing business with? If the manufacturer is dealing with your competitor, your ideas can get stolen really quick. So if you have sensitive intellectual property or even brands that you want to protect, you need to at least have a plan before you go out there and start sourcing. One of the areas of business that I'm in is black box assembly. Let's say that you've got a really cool band, but the mechanics are off the shelf. So we have clients that send us the band from the band supplier, the hardware from the hardware supplier, the clasp, mechanics from another supplier, and then behind closed doors I have 100 employees that just kit things together. So that's black box manufacturing. I'm not saying you have to use my firm, but you can be strategic about how you compartmentalize the products so that the wrong party doesn't see the whole thing. If you're dealing with proprietary items that are custom made, consider owning the tooling. For example, maybe to get this band in the shape that you want, the factory needs to have a certain type of compression tooling or mold to make it. You might say, all right, since this mold or tooling or jigs or gauges, whatever you want to call it, this equipment is used exclusively for my product, I'd like to own it outright so that if anything goes wrong with the supplier, I can pull it and maybe I can't necessarily move it quickly to another factory, but at least I've stopped the poor performing factory from the ability to replicate my product easily. So I put in my contracts when I'm doing custom products who owns the tooling, and that's a contract separate from the actual production order. It's also nice, one way to limit your exposure is to have some leverage over the supplier. If you have too much leverage, the ups and downs in your product cycle could really affect them adversely. So my rule is to have 20 to 35%. That's the sweet spot. If you can become that volume for the factory's output, so you represent 30% of their output, you're not too big, not too small, they would really have to think twice before compromising your intellectual property. Why the low price? Sometimes with these giant factories, if you get a price from a really professional factory that's low, sometimes they want to get your business in order to learn about your new design and product and then make it on their own. So sometimes when you get a really low price, there's a reason that factory is trying to entice you to do business with them. So as we talked about yesterday, it's important to do your homework, make sure that you're paying a reasonable price, not too low, not too high. Okay, register, limit exposure. Now let's talk about monitoring and enforcing. So you might have a great contract, you might get the factory ownership to sign up that they will never do business with your 3 competitors. The factory owner that signed it, he actually believes it and he wants to follow the agreement, but what about the other 15 people in the sales department or the engineering team? It's inevitably, if you have a really cool product being made at the factory, somebody from the sales department is going to say, hey, we made that really cool product, put it in my suitcase and I'll bring it to the trade show. Or, hey, let's take pictures of that and get it on the website. So even if you have the greatest contract explaining, do not showcase my product, clearly under contract with the supplier, there's still a likelihood that that product is going to find its way into the public domain. So whenever I have that type of relationship with a factory where there is an agreement in place, I monitor it. I ask any supplier, hey, which trade shows are you going to? They'll be so happy to tell you because they think that you're going to come to their booth, but really write those, oh, you'll be in Dusseldorf in December, I see you're doing Miami show, and then you or your friends or have somebody just walk by the booth and see if your product is for sale. The same can be true for like when you're visiting the factory, look in their showrooms, look in their website, check out their tool room, look in their stock room. You can learn a lot in the warehouse of a factory because on most boxes it will say the end customer's location and brand name. So say you have exclusivity where you better not be dealing with any other American customers, Mr. Factory. I don't care if you sell to Canada or Australia or UK, but I'm your only American customer per contract. And then you go into the storeroom and you see Walmart USA all over the boxes where they're shipping. Okay, that's a red flag that somebody in the organization isn't respecting you. So spend the time. You don't necessarily want it to appear that you distrust the supplier and you're snooping around. What I like to do is, thanks for the tour. When we go through the warehouse, do you mind if I take some pictures? And also, I'd like to test the thickness of your cardboard. I use this all the time. Do you mind if I take these samples of cardboard and just do a little stress test? In reality, my coworker's taking a picture of me by the box that says Walmart USA, while I'm pretending to do a stress test to get a close-up of where exactly it's shipping. So get yourself in the showroom, the stock room, the tool room, and look around diplomatically. So trust but verify. Taobao is like this is the #1 backdoor channel where factories sell product without you knowing it necessarily. It's all in Chinese, but you can do a keyword search, Taobao.com, have somebody that speaks Chinese, and they'll do a search and can find out easily if your approved vendor is selling your product out the back door. When we had our second child, I used Taobao. I saved so much money because I bought all the European and Japanese brands of cribs and really high-end stuff like clothing for children and everything. And it was all from the actual factories in English packaging, no Chinese on it. So it was literally from the authorized factory, but someone decided to make a few bucks at the factory and maybe sell excess stock out the back door. Oh, okay, you might say no harm, no foul, but what if I decided to buy 5,000 units of the product that you just made with the factory off of Taobao, and now I'm going to sell it, Gray Channel, into your market? That can really hurt. So keep an eye on Taobao. Another way to keep an eye on the factory's honesty is to have a friend of yours play the dummy customer, where you email or call the factory and say, hey, I heard you're making XYZ product. I don't know if you've done it before, but do you think you could make this watch for me? And if your friend is actually asking them to make your watch and they say yes, that's a very bad sign. I don't want to scare you away. The vast majority of suppliers are honest to deal with. As I said before, some of these suppliers are like family members to me, but you kind of have to assume the worst and monitor accordingly because they're under so much pressure to make money. The salesperson works on 100% commission. They're just so aggressive to get a new business, and this concept of respecting intellectual property, I don't know whether it's Confucianism, communism, or a lot of people crammed into a small place with a lot of energy to make money, but the concept of what is in personal space and what is in the public domain is very much blurred in China. So even if you think it's clearly that you own this technology, well, your supplier might have a different impression of what is in the public domain. All right. Now, if you monitor and you find out that that there is breach of contract, don't just say, oh, it's China, there's nothing I can do about it. 15 years ago, that's what I said, but things have changed so much after China has joined the World Trade Organization. The courts are becoming much more of a level playing field. You can issue a demand letter. Don't issue a demand letter in English from your lawyer in New York. The supplier is just going to laugh at that. But if you have a local attorney in Chinese, and they're more and more affordable, to issue a demand letter, politely, diplomatically explaining that if they don't come correct, there might be litigation. We can litigate in China. Foreigners can even investigate. So things have changed a lot. It's a level playing field in terms of our ability to enforce contracts. To show you how level of a playing field it is, I was involved in a case where it wasn't IP infringement, but it was like a wrongful termination of employment situation or something like that, where clearly the employee did a bad job and should have been fired, and the employee saying, no, you need to pay me severance, kind of like that in China. So I want to know what we were getting into. I went to the court and just to see how's this process work. I was kind of in the neighborhood, so I didn't even bring my lawyer with me, and it was all in Chinese, and I think they were surprised that some round eye shows up asking about how the Chinese court system works. And so the girl at the front desk said, well, you want to meet the judge that would handle your case? I'm like, sure, why not? It's afternoon on Friday. So I go sit down with them, and the judge let me explain the case. And then he called up the defendant and said, I've talked to Mike here. I think you're gonna lose if it comes to my court. Why don't you guys settle right now? So that would never, I don't think that'd be legal in the U.S., and certainly doesn't happen in the West. But in China, that judge had so many cases on on the docket that he just wanted to get things moving. So I had good contracts, they were in bilingual, I was a nice guy, and he went out of his way to make sure that I was protected as a foreigner in China. So don't let anybody tell you that the courts are biased against you. They may say that because they didn't have their contracts in place, they didn't have their contracts in Chinese, maybe because they tried to enforce their intellectual property after it was ripped off and they didn't bother to register it in the first time. In those cases, you will find yourself fighting an incredible uphill battle But if you apply the tips that we talked about in terms of having proper contracts, bilingual, your contract should also state a penalty if it's broken. Make the judge, make it really easy for him to lean in your favor.